What's up, everyone? Welcome back to our exclusive podcast for patrons and subscribers. We have one of our patrons with us today. This is Bryce. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Bryce is a good friend of mine. For those of you who have followed us for a long time, you've probably seen him before on previous podcasts. We've had you on a podcast before. And live streams and stuff like that for Ep.11. So he's here visiting me in Utah this week, so figured we'd have him on. You actually are a patron of the channel.
I am.
So you're going to get to ask us the first question for this month's podcast. What is your question?
My question is, what makes stories memorable? Like things that, because we have a lot of stories, tons of stories in our media nowadays, but what makes the story like in your mind that stays in your mind versus it just kind of fades over time?
Okay. You said you had a good answer.
Well, I think the answer to this, which is, I have what I'd say is probably the best answer to this. Generally speaking, would be archetypes. I think that archetypes are what make stories memorable because an archetype is something that you already have in somewhere in your mind, somehow, that you've just grown up with and that exists, and it's a part of your evolved nature as a human. And stories that resonate tend to be the stories that tell a tale that you're already more or less familiar with, but in a new and unexpected way that you've never seen them told before, right? And so you have to be able to nail both of those. You can't tell a completely new, completely unexpected story that nobody is familiar with any of what happens, right? You need to have good amount of familiarity, but you need to balance that with the new and the mysterious, which you are incorporating into what would otherwise be considered just an archetypal story, right? So, that's a brief answer, but I could talk for hours about this.
It's a really interesting answer because there's a question later about the last story. And the thing about the last story came out at the same time as Xenoblade Chronicles.
Yes, I remember, yeah.
And everybody remembers or gravitated towards Xenoblade. Xenoblade was the more successful title.
Of the two, yeah.
And I was talking about this with somebody recently. It's like, I remember really liking the last story, but I do not remember much about it. Like, my memory of that game is very fuzzy, but it's not because it was bad or forgettable necessarily in like the negative sense. It's just that I don't remember the details. And it's hard to nail down why, but Xenoblade is very memorable. And what you said is interesting because Xenoblade does play into a lot of tropes or archetypes of the JRPG that I grew up loving.
Right.
It was a return to form in a lot of ways that I thought was important at the time.
Yeah.
But the world concept of Xenoblade was something I had never seen before.
Yeah.
The worlds being these Goliath Titans.
Yes.
The bodies of the Titans are the world that you run around
That's
on.
a pretty
and
cool
build
concept.
Their cities.
Yeah.
So it was novel in one particular way that was striking and iconic, but it also had that familiarity to the JRPG formula I felt I had been missing for a long time and reminded me of the Golden Age. So I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. I think that's a really good answer. I think in addition to that, sports analogy again.
Oh, I love him.
When people make their lists of like top basketball players or whatever, or whatever it is, particularly when you get to positions, like they say the top 5 centers of all time. I feel like a player like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who is the leading scorer in the history of the game,
ever,
most points scored of any player who's ever lived. He had a very milquetoast finesse game.
Right.
His game was the skyhook.
It wasn't quite as fun to watch.
It wasn't really striking visually.
Yes.
The way that Shaquille O'Neal's game was.
Oh, yes.
Shaquille O'Neal
bully ball.
just bullied people.
Oh, yeah.
He ran through you to the basket.
Yes.
And his athleticism, based on the size of the individual, was unlike anything you'd ever seen before.
Yeah.
but his game wasn't as refined as someone like Kareem's
Yeah,
was.
his footwork, yeah.
So when people make their lists, I think there's a tendency, particularly if you're a younger person and you maybe grew up watching Shaq. I guess those people aren't young anymore. But
Shaq was drafted in 92.
but it's easy to have Shaq come to mind or maybe think of Shaq because Shaq was just a dominant presence.
Yeah.
His game was striking to the eye, where Kareem's was not. And he was a gentler personality. He wasn't like as outspoken.
Yep.
So Shaq is a more memorable center than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in a sense. I think there might be something to that as well, where if the imagery is striking, if there's symbols, or if it's a movie, the cinematography or the costume design or character design or something about it really sticks out and is striking,
Yeah.
I think that goes a long way.
Well, as you mentioned the movie analogy, you've got Jack Sparrow.
Yeah.
As pirates can be, he is so obviously just a pirate. Look at him, everything about him. But he's a pirate like you've never seen a pirate before,
Yes.
and he's so different and unique. And that balance is harder to find than you would think.
Yeah.
Because they didn't just do typical, trope pirate. They put a different flair on it, but you can't do too much of that. Then he's not a pirate anymore. But you can't do too little of that because now he's not as
He's just a
interesting.
generic
But you've
pirate.
got to really just straddle that line, and they did it perfectly there. And those are the characters that really resonate.
And I think, at least this is my theory. This is my theory to make any memorable game in history is that it has to involve with aesthetics. So if you want to know if your character has strong character design, period, you always put them in silhouette.
Yeah, the silhouette of the
Yeah.
character.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And then you know if they can be recognized as a silhouette, then they can be always recognized everywhere.
Right.
That's smart.
It's like the
Cloud.
who's that Pokemon?
Yes,
that Pokemon.
And they
if
do-
you recognize it, that's a good design.
That's a good design.
And then the second thing to strike memory, right? Because as human beings, we're very mammal. We have to have things like, because auditorily we can process information and we can see information. But if you notice when you take your tests, you usually don't remember much of the test. You remember the aspect of trying to take the test, and you remember all that other stuff. But if you don't applicate your knowledge, usually the test fades
Oh,
away.
you mean that if you don't put the knowledge into practice somehow, it's easy to forget.
Yeah.
Yeah, you may have aced a test, and a year later you don't know.
Yeah.
You don't remember any
yeah,
of it
yeah.
because you just memorized words and numbers,
Yeah.
but you didn't like
So you're saying
actually
there's some praxis.
apply the knowledge.
Necessary.
Yeah, and usually it goes away too as well because if the test was a negative test, you don't really want the knowledge because your feelings are like, that
sucked to study for.
Yeah,
that
all
was a
that
miserable
other
experience.
stuff, right? And so the next step to create anything, at least I think, is feeling. So like with Final Fantasy, one of the most iconic, Final Fantasy VII, the opening scene with that whole entire thing, it has so much feeling in it and so much iconic like look to it that you just absorb into that, and then everybody's starting to talk about it. And so for just like novel wise, that's the same thing. Is that you'll have moments that people will talk about in the story that they remember with feeling than they more remember.
Yeah,
with like,
you're right, because you usually imprint memories when you have strong emotion.
Yes, that's true.
So if you can create those high impact emotional moments, those are generally going to be more memorable than the other parts. And so that's kind of circling back to last story. It was very competent. Like the whole time I was like, this is well done. But there wasn't any moment I feel in the game where I got struck emotionally really powerfully. And so I kind of forgot the details of the plot and the characters for that reason. Probably.
That's a game I'd be interested in playing on the podcast.
I think we should.
Yeah.
I think we should put it on the list.
Vote for it, people.
Thank you for that question. It's a good question. All right. The next one here comes from Eva Pilot Fair. We've talked about escapism a few times on the podcast in the past. I know you've done a podcast on this topic before and it was great, but don't remember if you guys have mentioned ever falling into escapism too hard yourselves. That is, if it's ever happened to you, of course. my interests have tended to be very varied in my life. Like I like a lot of things. I have a lot of hobbies, and so I don't know if I've ever gotten stuck before on just one thing.
And are we talking about obsessively? I think that's the other
Yeah,
thing
like
too.
sort of an obsessive.
What, like you play World of Warcraft 10 hours a day?
Yeah,
kind of
that.
You lose yourself in a thing, and you're trying to escape from your normal life, and you just are stuck on this thing.
Because you can take that in a positive form or the negative, like
Sure.
you just got so involved that all of a sudden, oh man, there's so many hours
Yeah.
I can't even think what happened.
Yeah, I've gotten lost
Yeah, I've gotten lost.
in
Yeah.
things before.
I have, and I've been into things for a while, but not
Would you say
not too long, and
with-
not typically to the detriment of other aspects of my life.
Would you say that maybe a little bit though when you first moved back to Denver? And
Yes.
With
RuneScape.
RuneScape.
Yes, I got pretty high level on RuneScape. There wasn't much to do, so I would play RuneScape for an hour or two. But yeah, no, because so the way the system worked at the place I went to go play it was I'd go and you would have to log in for like 45 minutes, like a library. It was like a public computer kind of thing. Because we were just in our apartment, and we had a computer there, but maybe Parker or Landon or Tanner.
Would be
No,
on it.
Landon wasn't there. Parker or Tanner or my dad. Somebody else would be on it, so I'd have to go. So I'd go to the library, and you log in for 45 minutes, and if nobody else shows up, you can keep playing. But often people would show up. So I'd usually maybe spend a couple hours playing RuneScape, just level grinding, doing nothing. And then I'd go and play basketball for a while, because they also had the gym at the apartments that I was at. And I didn't really have any friends. I was in a brand new place. So escapism, that may have been, that's probably the closest that I've been,
That
was
you've
like
been to
right
it.
then.
But it didn't totally consume your life or anything.
No, and after a month or two, when our house was built and I moved to a new place, I kind of
Adjusted.
stopped playing RuneScape and started doing other stuff. And I adjusted, pretty well.
I would say I had a moment, but not with escapism entertainment, but competitive entertainment, like League of Legends, like a big MOBA player.
Oh, sure.
And like when it first came out, I was in college, and you would have to play for like 30 minutes, and it's like one more click, one more click,
Yeah.
one more click.
It's so easy
that's
to
how
do
it is.
it that way.
and you want to play to rank yourself up and all the other
Yes,
stuff.
yes.
So I've lost myself in an unhealthy way to do that, where I had to be like, oh, I'm not studying. So I've done that, but not to the degree of like, it was always in competitive play, never entertainment value.
Yeah. I would, just the last point on this, hopefully we're not making Eva feel bad or anything like that.
I just haven't dealt
I
with
have
it.
the right personality type to have been consumed by something like this.
Yeah.
Extremely introverted and reclusive, especially when moving to new places as a kid, not wanting to go out and meet people, feeling kind of isolated and alone, and having just obsessive tendencies. I tend to struggle with that. Sometimes I really obsess over work, for instance, and I'll just work and work and work and work until I feel like I've done something to a satisfactory level. So I have the right personality type for it. However, I had a mother who refused to let me do anything.
And your mother
obsessively.
is great, by the way.
Yeah.
Like she is. That now that I have kids, I'm like, I kind of want to parent the way that your mom did.
She
Just limit a lot of this stuff.
She would put very big limits on how long we could play video games.
When
she,
I remember you guys, it was mostly like Saturdays, because I'd come over
Yeah.
to play,
Yeah.
and it would be like, yeah, we got to go outside though. Like, oh man.
yeah, we couldn't play until we had certain chores done, till homework was done.
Yeah.
We were very, I don't want to say forced, but highly encouraged to do extracurricular activities at school. So I was always
Yeah.
at basketball practice or in the theater,
Yeah,
club,
that's right.
or doing things. And it was
Yeah.
against my nature. Had I been allowed to just do what I wanted
Your mom
to do,
kind of forced you
I
to be
would
that
not
way.
have done those things.
Yeah, yeah.
She pushed me to do that, and I think that despite my tendencies, kept my life balanced.
Yeah.
And so I don't think, I just don't have any memories of struggling with this too much.
I do, actually. So my form of escapism isn't material, isn't anything like this. It's just daydreaming. It's my mind.
Oh, sure.
And
yeah.
I do have a problem with this. I will just think, and I'll get fixated on one thing, and I will think it through over and over and over and over until I figure it out. And it's very time consuming. But I feel when I figure something out, I do feel accomplished. It definitely is a form of escapism though. Like whenever I have time, and I'm not studying a language or something like that, I will kind of just sit and think, but I tend to think about the same things over and over and over.
The same.
Because there's an issue, there's a problem. I get stuck on certain problems, and I think about it until I figure something out that makes sense. And that's always fun for me, but that's an escapism thing that I do quite often.
Yeah. So there you go, Eva. Hopefully that's a satisfactory answer. Wish I could give a little more, but I definitely would have had a problem with this as a kid, if not for my mother, who taught me how to live a balanced life. The next one comes from Bob Harrington. If Xenogears were to get remastered, what new features would you like to see? Would you want the developers to change any of the game content, like adding more playable segments to Disc 2, or adding new enemy types, like mentioned on the podcast, having more Wells-type enemies to tie random battles more into the narrative? Or would you want it to remain true to how it was released in 1998? I would want them to do a 2D character on 3D backgrounds.
Yes,
but
don't change that.
Like in the Octopath
Like
format.
Octopath or Triangle Strategy.
Yeah. I would want that.
That would
not
be awesome.
A Final Fantasy VII style remake where they go for full realism. I would not want that.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good.
That
would be crazy for Xenogears.
The one thing I want in a Xenogears re-release of any kind, whether it's a remake or remaster, is just a competent translation of the game. And
that's priority number one.
That's not a knock on Honeywood. It's just Honeywood would admit this himself, and
Yes.
he worked to change the whole culture of translation at Square, and their translations and localizations started to
Yes.
get much better after that. The reason we have Vagrant Story, the peak of peak localizations of Japanese RPGs, is because Honeywood went through what he did on Xenogears.
Yeah.
So it's not a knock on him. It's just a longing for a competent translation of Xenogears.
I haven't played Disc 2 yet, but from what I've heard about it, yeah, I would assume that I would prefer that they flesh that out if they were going to actually remake this game. Make that Disc 2 a little more interesting, gameplay-wise.
Yep. You haven't played Xenogears, so.
No.
Done.
It looks amazing game.
Very good game so far.
All right, this one's going to be really quick. I need to know Mike's fitness and diet plan. Okay, so two things. One, I'm going to put in the description of the video. No, maybe I'll put it on screen. I will put my meal plan on the screen so you guys can copy down ingredients to buy at the store, like what the meals are and how to prep them. I will run that on the screen so you guys can see exactly what I eat when I am cutting. The problem with me is that I am exceptionally disciplined with my diet when I cut. And I am exceptionally undisciplined when I bulk.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know why.
that's a problem.
I don't know why. What you should do typically is bulk about 8 months, clean bulk, cut 4. So that if your goal is to put on muscle and to increase your strength. Typically that's the split that's best. 8 months bulking, 4 months cutting, 8 months bulking, 4 months cutting. However, with the surplus that I eat in on bulks, which is not disciplined, I tend to start to get overweight after about 5 or 6 months of bulking. So I don't know what it is. When I'm starving and hungry on my cuts, it's like, no, mind against matter, I will win. You don't tell me what to do. I am disciplined, I will win.
Punch yourself in the stomach.
When I'm not feeling those urges and those cravings and stuff, for some reason it's just harder for me to say no to the stuff that, anyways. So I'm not great. Don't follow my diet plan on bulks. What you want to do is take all this stuff I'm putting on the screen and just increase the portions a little bit for the same exact foods when you bulk. and you should be able to go about 8 months without gaining an excessive amount of weight that way.
All right, everybody. I'm just going to make a couple of extra quick notes as I'm putting these recipes and meal plans on the screen here. One thing that you will have to keep in mind is that this was all calculated for my specific body mass index. And you will have to find out what that is for yourself and amend it as such. So I'm 6'2", and I was around 190 pounds when I was creating this meal plan, and I was trying to cut weight at that time. So this meal plan more or less was calculated for a daily caloric intake of just above 2,000 calories, so 2,200 calories per day. That is the amount that I need to eat to cut weight at the rate that I wanted to in that 4-month span that I was doing so. I actually didn't end up cutting for 4 months on this one. I had already started cutting before this, but I went down from about 205 to 175 in the space of about 3 months or something like that. But in any case, you will have to calculate how many calories you need to eat per day to lose weight or gain weight, depending on what your goal is, based on your own body mass index. So there are a lot of places you can do that online. Just do a Google search for body mass index calculator. You put in your weight, your age, your height, and it'll give you an idea based on the goal that you choose, whether you want to lose weight or gain weight or whatever, about how many calories per day you should be eating. A really great app to help you keep track of that is an app called MyFitnessPal. MyFitnessPal is amazing. It makes it so easy to keep track of what you're eating, not only for keeping track of the calories, but also for tracking how many macro and micronutrients you're getting. So basically, how much protein should you eat? How many carbs should you eat? That sort of thing. There's a lot of different advice that you'll get in terms of exactly what percentages of each macronutrient you should eat. As you're getting started, I would try not to worry about that too much, other than to try to eat something like 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass. So in other words, just to, use myself as an example, I was trying to get down to about 175 was my goal weight, where I would be at a body fat percentage that I would be happy with. That would give me like a really lean look, and maybe have some abs showing and that sort of thing. That was what I was going for. And at that weight, I was 175 pounds. So what that means is that my target of protein intake per day was about 175 grams. You don't have to get exactly that many, 180 grams or 175 grams. You could go down to 150 and you'd probably be fine. But you do need to take in something like 0.75 to 1 gram per pound of your lean body weight. Other than that, this carb cycling diet that I'll talk about more in a minute will do a good job of, sort of managing how many carbs you should eat versus fats and that sort of thing. Another thing to keep in mind is that all of these recipes were delicious for me, except for one. I did not like the spice-crusted chicken breast recipe at all. I thought it was terrible. So all I did was end up replacing that recipe, the spice-crusted chicken breast. I replaced that with the blackened fish recipe, and it more or less, came out to about the same numbers in terms of the calorie counts and protein and all that stuff. So if there's, some recipe on here that you can't stand, feel free to amend it as you will. But other than that, just make sure you calculate your own body mass index so that you know how many calories you need to eat per day to lose weight. And then just make sure that, you amend these numbers on here to fit, yourself. One thing that you can do too on MyFitnessPal, it makes it really easy, is you can use the scanner, so you can scan barcodes on any package for food that you buy, and you can input the portion that you ate, and it'll just keep track of all that stuff for you. So you can just, like I said, you pick up the package that the food came in, you scan the barcode, you tell it how many servings you ate, and bam, it'll just input all of that stuff in for you. The protein and all the macronutrients, all the micronutrients, and the calorie count. It just counts it all up for you. Makes it really, really simple. You don't have to do a lot of calculating yourself. You just scan the thing and it calculates it for you. So I definitely recommend MyFitnessPal. And doing this carb cycling, which I'll talk about now more here, in the podcast.
So that's all up there. But here's the thing, is that there is no diet plan that works for everybody.
I know, that's the hardest part.
You have to find what works for you. So I went through about 10 years now of trying different stuff. And none of it really worked for me until I found carb cycling. The idea is called carb cycling. I tried keto, for instance, for about 6 months in 2019. And that's about the most miserable I've ever felt.
Really?
It was really effective. I lost a ton of weight doing that because the entire idea is you just don't eat carbs.
You make your body think that it's dying.
Yes. So your body will either use carbohydrates for energy or ketones, which comes from fat.
Fat, yeah.
Ketones are stored
and then
in
sugar. Just don't eat sugar.
in the excising of carbs from your diet, sugar is a part of that.
Sugar should also go away. Yeah.
So you don't eat rice, you don't eat bread,
potatoes.
You don't eat potatoes and starchy foods, you don't eat sugar. You cut all that stuff out and you focus on fresh vegetables, particularly leafy vegetables, spinach, broccoli, not a lot of carrots, which has a lot of sugar in it. So you're still limited there.
Yeah.
Not a lot of tomatoes. It's broccoli and spinach and meat.
Brussels sprouts, and meat.
Well, and I think
some eggs.
Any diet that succeeds,
yes,
in my opinion,
the one you should use.
Because the one I've been on for 3 years now.
Yeah, and it's working.
And guess what I did? I just read and was like, okay, this is the stuff I like that I don't think I can ever sacrifice.
Yeah.
But I need to make sure that I'm doing it appropriately.
Yeah.
And then once you build the habit of getting healthy stuff, I also talked to dietitians, and so they were, nutritionists? I think that's what they're called.
Both.
Yeah. Anyway, they usually are in hospitals, and they'll go and they're blah, 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 blah. Anyway, and they always taught me certain different things, and then I read online everything. So education about nutrition is key, because once you go, oh, this is what this does, you will tend not to eat it because you understand what it does.
Yeah. There's a video that went circled around a few years back of what happens when you drink soda.
Yes.
And it got millions of views. And
well, they show them cleaning,
I don't drink soda as much anymore.
they clean steel, rust off of steel using
with
Coca-Cola
Coke or Dr. Pepper. Yeah,
it's that stuff. What is it doing to the inside of your stomach? Yeah. You have found a lot of really
cleaning
great
off all that steel.
Yeah,
in your stomach.
You have found a lot of really great sugar substitutes. Are there any that you would?
Oh yeah. So if you like sugars, right, and you can't get off of sugars like me. Alcohol sugars are the best, especially if you're diabetic, which I kind of run into.
So rum?
Actually, it's they're called...
Eggnog?
No. Those are all sugars. So they're all... And sugar is wonderful, by the way. And it's hard, and your body has to get used to it. So if you expect to get on any type of sugar substitute and be I love this.
Oh, it's just like the other stuff.
And it's just, it will take you a month because your body's so used to eating... And you've trained yourself to be I need energy, give me sugar.
Yeah.
And so you have to get out of those two forms of habit. And then when you realize, oh, this tastes good, then you start to formulate that. But alcohol sugars are really good. I prefer what is called xylitol, and ethitol because they don't have hardly aftertaste. Because aspartame and all that other stuff has
Diet
these
Coke stuff,
have these really hard
aftertaste.
taste. And for me, I like
Splenda.
to drink a lot of drinks, and so Roar is the drink I drink. I'm not a carbonation fan. And it tastes sweet, and it has all alcohol sugars. And then the ice cream that I get is called Rebel because it has all the flavors such as cookie dough and cookies and cream, and it just tastes really good like sugar.
But it has no sugar in it.
And it's great for your stuff. I mean, obviously studies still have to come out, but as it stands right now, it won't do anything to your pancreas, which is the number one thing that is hard.
So there's some good advice there. Find a diet plan that works for you. Carb cycling worked for me because my body tends to really not function well if I don't have any carbs at all. So carb cycling, and this is the diet stuff I put on the screen, is 1 day really low carb, maybe 2 days really low carb, 1 day high carb, 2 days low carb, 1 day high carb. And this kind of switches you from being in that state of burning carbs for energy into then being in the state of burning ketones for energy, and then it switches back and forth. Because what I found on keto was that eventually my body adapted to that, and the weight loss would become very slow.
That same problem like 3 months ago.
Like your body gets used to it, and then your weight loss
Yep.
decreases. It's like you plateau.
I did a 3-day fast.
Yeah.
Lost like 2 pounds. I was so disappointed. I was like, you gotta be kidding me.
Because
but
your
the first
body-
time I
yeah.
did a 3-day fast, I lost like 12 pounds.
And that's why I like carb cycling, is because it's like constantly switching which one it goes to. And so you can actually sustain your weight loss for longer. At least I found that was the case.
That makes sense.
So that's what I like there. As for fitness, it's really easy. I just do push-pull legs, push-pull legs. So I try to work every muscle group twice a week. I'll go do, like bench press, shoulder press, tricep extensions, any pressing movement on day 1. Day 2, pulling movements, whether that's pull-ups or rows or bicep curls or bent over rows or whatever. Then I'll do legs on day 3, and then I repeat that. And at first you're not going to be able to do that because you're going to be really sore if you haven't been going to the gym. So you'll want to do it 3 days. For the first month, you go to 3 days a week, get into the habit of 3 days a week. And then when that starts to, your recovery time is better, then start to try to get two
per week, two muscle groups.
Each muscle group twice per week.
Yeah.
There we go. That's pretty much what I do. It's not anything crazy. You just got to stick to it. You got to be dedicated to it. And also, let's just leave it at that for now. This is taking too long.
It was a fun workout. So
yeah, he went with me the last couple days.
Yeah.
And, okay, this one comes from Ash G. In the Xenogears podcast, you often said how there's a lot of foreshadowing that seems very obvious, but you didn't notice it your first playthrough. For me, I think I missed even more obvious things that Kaysen seems to have already figured out. I was pretty young when I first played Xenogears, which didn't help, but even though when I first played the game, I usually don't overthink it, so I can easily miss big hints. What about you? If it's your first playthrough, do you guys like to analyze in details what is said and shown, looking for deeper meaning?
Can I do this first?
Yeah, I think you have a good answer for this. Go for it.
I don't like, on a first playthrough, I'm actually having trouble with my analytical side for this game being a first playthrough.
Yeah.
It is extremely frustrating. The only reason I'm seeing more about this game than I otherwise normally would have is because of this podcast. I'm purposefully analyzing and looking into this stuff. I would have missed a lot more had I not been clued in. And you guys will probably have noticed on podcast number 1, podcast number 2, I guess, because 1 we just talked about the development. Podcast number 2 on, I have gradually lessened my analysis of what I think is happening from a psychoanalytical perspective, because I got some stuff wrong in my initial analysis, but second off, there's so much here, and it's exhausting to try to read everything into it. And half the time, I was reading too much into it, and I'm getting the wrong inferences from it, right? And that's exhausting. And so as things keep going, I'm starting to miss more and more and more than I did initially, because, and I can feel it, I can notice it, because I keep asking, what, they said that? Oh, dang it. Now, initially, I was we're going way in with all that stuff, but now it's very difficult, and I'm realizing just how vast and how crazy and how big this game is, and it's not so fun of an experience. I would prefer my first gameplay experience to be really fun, and I'm loving Xenogears, I really am, but it's a slow process for me, and I'd rather just kind of speed up the pace and just get through the game and then go back and analyze it after the fact. My analysis will be much better, much sharper. I'll understand the symbolism references better instead of just kind of guessing all around here, which is why I may have predicted some things, I guess, but not others, It's because I'm kind of just throwing everything out there. At least I was early on, and it's been a difficult process for me to keep up with the analysis while at the same time not really knowing where it's going. Because which archetype is this? Well, some of that depends on how it ends.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly where all this stuff's going. And then once this stuff happens, I want to go back 5 episodes and then input some more analysis into stuff we already talked about. We don't have a ton of time for that. I forget to do that. But at the same time, I have insights from previous episodes that I would have had I played this game before.
I think that there's kind of one thing I think we should do is once it's finished, go back to key moments and revisit them
I would
as
love
a
to.
final episode.
I
And be
would.
like,
I would love
now we
that.
know this. Oh, I thought this before, but now
Yeah.
this. And I think we should do that for sure because that's kind of what you have to do with Xenogears anyways. But one thing that really frustrates me is playing through a really long game like Xenogears and getting to the end and feeling like I have no idea what I just played. That's one of the most frustrating feelings in the world for me when engaging
I've felt
with
that
media.
several times, yeah.
Is if I feel like I get to the end and I didn't get it, I feel bad. I feel, that wasn't a good experience. So I tend, this is maybe part of the reason why spoilers don't bother me so much.
Oh, yeah.
Because I like to examine scene to scene, where it's going. How are they constructing this reveal? Less so than I'm just gonna experience it and go with the flow of the story. Because if I feel like I missed stuff at the end, there's several games in particular, like Final Fantasy games and stuff, where I played for the first time, I was I don't really get this.
Right.
Final Fantasy X was an example of that. Final Fantasy IX, the whole ending of 9, I was just what
Oh my
on
gosh,
earth
9.
is going on
Yeah.
here?
9 is
I don't like that feeling,
Yeah.
having finished something and not feeling like I get it. And Xenogears was that the first time I played it. To the highest degree, I had no clue what the fetch I just played. So I think because I have that personal reaction to things when I don't get them, I like to understand it while I'm playing it. And so I've tended to become more analytically minded while the first experience is happening, because I'm trying to avoid that negative feeling at the end of feeling like I'm stupid, I didn't get it. Right?
So you ended up enjoying it after you started looking into this stuff.
Yes,
right?
I didn't know whether I even liked Xenogears when I first played it. It was when I started doing all the research for the review and all the discussion videos, and at the end of that process, this game's amazing. But I remembered being very, very frustrated when I actually played it. And so that's why I tend to do a lot of reading into development history before I play something.
Yeah.
Even if it's not something I'm going to cover on the channel, I'll look up, okay, what were they going for? This is referenced, okay, this was an inspiration, okay, what's that all about? So that I feel like I have context before I start playing, and then it's easier to pick up on some things as you're going along. And you still have the surprises of the big reveals, but I feel oh, I get it though. I'm not lost. So
You don't have to feel like you take notes.
Yeah.
You need Metal Gear Solid. You needed a notebook to be okay.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I think that's the key with any information overload, because stories that have information overload, I think getting into the process of having a notebook beside you,
Yes.
you'll retain a lot more information.
yes, that's the other part of it too. Is
It's just not as fun to play though.
Yeah, no, it's not.
you remember it better this way.
Having written
We've talked
down.
about whether something's memorable or not, right? I tend to have a very foggy memory a lot of times, especially with names. I'm terrible at remembering people's names. So it's like, this guy, what was the name of the guy again who did this? And what was the name of that Valar that did that? And like, I cannot retain names very well unless I'm taking notes. And when I take notes and I review the notes, and that's what I kind of do on the podcast and stuff, is like I play through a section, I stop. What I will do is I'll actually play through it and take notes while I'm playing, but then I will go back and rewatch my own stream again.
Nice.
Not playing, so I'm not concentrating on playing, I'm concentrating on
that's pretty good.
reading, and then I'll take additional notes, and it's a lot more that I retain on the second watch of that part. It's like, oh, I didn't pick up on that. Oh, I didn't pick up on that. Okay, write this down, write this down. And then all of a sudden, my memory retention is far greater, and I actually feel like I know what's going on. So that's just me, but I don't think I'm the norm on that. I think most people hate feeling spoiled, and so it's difficult to enjoy something if you're like obsessively looking at all those details and spoiling it for yourself in a sense, right? Like looking too much into background and giving yourself too much context, and maybe you can guess where it's going, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. This next one comes from Hunter Springate. I'm a couple of years older than you guys, but basically the same age. Back in the day, the best analogy I can describe is that I had season tickets to Squaresoft from 94 to 2002. I bought and played every game they released. What is another company right now that when they release a game, you are automatically going to check it out without knowing a whole lot about the game?
Well,
I
guess
struggle
there
with this
isn't
one.
because not even Nintendo. They release a game a month. I don't play any of their stuff unless it's like a specific franchise.
There are franchises. Like
Yeah.
I will always play a new Mario. I
Yeah.
will always play a new Zelda.
Yes.
But I don't just play any Nintendo game.
No, not even close.
It used to be Squaresoft
Yeah.
in the 90s.
I'll tell you what.
Late 90s.
Late 2000s, it could have been. Who makes Assassin's Creed?
Oh, Ubisoft?
Ubisoft. They had the Splinter Cell and the Assassin's Creed stuff.
Yes,
and
you're right.
some Prince of Persia. Ubisoft did a few really cool things until maybe the mid 2000s, and
Beyond
it kind
Good and Evil.
of got old. Yeah,
Yeah.
But
Everything they made in the early to mid 2000s was pretty great.
it was great. Yeah,
And then they really tanked after Assassin's Creed.
I don't know.
And
I don't know
that's-
what happened.
I think that's the problem that we're running into nowadays, because they used to be BioWare for me. Like I used
Oh,
to,
BioWare.
yeah, BioWare,
Oh,
and
man.
then that has just degraded, and unfortunately, so what has happened, what has evolved, is I less look at the company
Yes.
and look at the director.
Yes,
And
exactly.
so because
Yeah.
I think nowadays you have companies that are maximizing their profits nowadays, right?
of course.
And it's a sea now, because back in the day it wasn't a sea, right? It was like a lake. A lake. We need to go catch a fish in this lake, right? And you get it, and you have this nice meal. And so it's which lake do I need to get in? And now it's an ocean. So they're always trying to compete against so much that we're not in lakes anymore. We're in oceans, and so I think individuals make great products nowadays because of the direction instead of the company. Because like Capcom, I love Capcom. They make my fighting games. They make Mega Man. They make Resident Evil, right? And that's like a multitude of different genres. But
Right.
there's always the ugly one they make. And
Because
just make a lot.
That's how, and we've talked about this before on the podcast. They want you to associate the franchise or the series with the company's brand. They'll put the brand's logo, Capcom, and you're like, oh, Capcom makes what I like. No, there's a man in Capcom who directed that game. You should
a
learn his
team,
name
yeah.
and find out he actually left that company 15 years ago, and he's making this now. And that's probably that's what happened with Final Fantasy for me, right? It was like, ooh, I see that Squaresoft logo, and I just feel all these feelings. Oh,
Yep,
Squaresoft,
yep.
Final Fantasy, these brand names. But Hironobu
those people-
Sakaguchi and Yasumi Matsuno were the ones I liked,
Yeah.
not Kitase and Nomura and those who have kept it going since their departure. And so there's a reason why I have not loved the newer Final Fantasy games.
Yeah,
But
that's
I loved Lost Odyssey, which felt more like Final Fantasy than Final Fantasy 11 and 12 did to me, right? So, yeah, you're right. You got to find an artist
Yeah.
at that company who you resonate with their work and follow them, not the brand. Right?
Because you look at Resident Evil, right? You look at Resident Evil because 4 was amazing, and then the remake of 2 was another big hit, and then 7 and so on, and it is the original creator that went back to it and said, hey, and whether he was producing it or whether he was directing it, he was a main focus. And I think this is what people overlook all the time. You are not playing a game for a lot of things that you think you're playing it for.
Yes.
You're playing for a feeling that the game gives you.
Yeah.
And
Right.
Resident Evil was always about surviving. And then all of a sudden it escalated to action.
Yeah.
And then when it escalated
5 and
to
6,
action, everybody's like, oh, this is terrible. And then they went, okay, we got you. You had to come back. And then he recreated, even though I hate Resident Evil, it's like it's a 45 caliber and you're shooting the zombie. I'm like, this thing should not even be here at this point. This is not in our
Should have
world.
disintegrated
Yeah, it's like, yeah. But anyway, but still, it had the feeling of survival, even though it's breaking my level of reason.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, follow artists, not companies,
Yeah.
is the key there. This next one comes from Dude McGuy. Do you think you would ever cover a game on the podcast that neither of you have played prior? That was kind of what we did with Nier.
Yes.
I had played it, but I had not beaten it before.
Okay.
And if
Then
you,
that was
yeah, if you did, do you think you would feel compelled to use a guide on a first playthrough so you don't miss any important gameplay or story secrets? Would you feel tempted to spoil yourself on plot twists for the purpose of analyzing the setups? We kind of answered this a little bit in the previous one here.
yeah.
I don't love the idea of an analysis series being done by two people who have never played the thing before.
That is 100% true.
It's like you
Yeah.
can't analyze something you are not familiar with.
You can try, but you'll throw things out that are wrong initially, and then
I think there is a fun dynamic, and I think the audience has agreed based on the comments, to having one person who has not and one person who has.
Yeah.
Because they like to watch somebody experiencing it for the first time, and they're like so excited to see how this, because you wish you could return to your first
yes, actually,
experience with the thing.
Yeah.
I think there's an element there that works, but if we were to both have no familiarity, just total blind playthrough the first time, there would not be very valuable analysis. in that.
Exactly. What would be the point of the?
Yeah. It would just be, it would be a reaction podcast, not an analysis podcast.
Yeah.
So I don't think we will do that
Yeah, I agree.
unless we decide not to analyze something, but just to react to it as a first impression, right?
Yeah.
So this one comes from the Malgador. How do you feel about not engaging with sequel media? I decided a while back that I wouldn't play The Last of Us Part 2
Smart.
because the first one was perfect and nothing they do in the sequel would make it a better experience for me and would most likely tarnish my thoughts on the series. I also did the same thing for Rise of Skywalker and Final Fantasy VII Intergrade because Remake and the new Star Wars movies left a bad taste in my mouth and I don't want to engage with those any further. What do you think of this, and do you do this with anything?
Yeah, you're speaking my language. Do this all the time. Stories should be self-contained, one time. If you had a better story, then that's what you should have told instead of... So if you think you're going to do a better job in the second one, then that means either you just had this cool idea later on of how you can continue it because the marketers said, hey, we want more money, let's keep doing it. Or you decided on purpose to tell a story that wasn't as good of a story for your first game. Well, why didn't you just tell the better story for your first game? Like, the hero's journey makes the most sense as a journey if there's transcendence after the cycle is completed. It should not have to keep going. Now, in some ways, it keeps going in different aspects of life. But generally speaking, you've got the one great overarching story, and then that's it, and you're done. You tell another story now. Do another thing. Make another game. Now, if it was pre-planned from the beginning, I get it, and you're doing it episodically, that's fine, whatever. But
the Lord of the Rings trilogy,
or Star
or
Wars.
Mass Effect, or
Well,
something
not
like that.
current Star Wars, but George
The
Lucas Star
original
Wars.
trilogy, Star
Back when
Wars.
the guy who made it was making them. That stuff. I'm not talking about this new stuff that
Yeah.
he's not involved in. But yeah, that's mostly what I'm talking about.
I think, at least when it comes to this, when you ever, when it's characters, I find in an anime they kind of do a little bit better of a job continuing like a long story. One Piece, Naruto.
Because there's many arcs.
Yeah, there's many arcs, and so they usually choose something of an idea. Now, the thing I like is generational change. So, like when you complete a story, and then all of a sudden there are like kids and other like descendants from your original characters, is like really cool concept, and I think it does well, but very few people do it. And I think when you're ever trying to do a sequel, right? They want to revisit those characters. They want to feel that. But there's a problem that you have with that as a creator, at least I feel, is that you have your work, you are going through whatever you're going through life as a time, and then once that work is complete, you tend to divorce it. And so you're not going through your same experiences as you would. And then once the idea is gone, it's hard to come back and recapture the idea. I mean, I think there are a few creators that has a good visionary to the point where they're like, this is how I make my games. But a lot of creators, when you hear them through interviews, they tend to be like, it just happened.
They don't.
Yeah.
They don't have necessarily like a hard rules or structure.
Yeah.
They just feel their way through it.
Yeah, and so you have to understand, if you're, I think, analytical, probably you have a better aspect of keeping that unity. But if you're more imaginative, it's going to be difficult to always make the same masterpieces unless you know analytically what makes those.
So there's kind of two types of sequels, and one of them I would be inclined to avoid, kind of like the Malgadar is talking about here. And to me, it's usually, this thing was an unexpected success.
Blair Witch Project 2.
How do we do this? How do we do this again?
Yeah.
When it was never written with that intention.
Exactly.
Typically what happens in this scenario is that they repeat many of the same beats from the original thing, hoping that they will recapture the same magic or the lightning in the bottle twice.
Yep.
A great example of this, and this is not to say that that these are terrible movies per se, but the Back to the Future sequels just repeat the same exact things from the first movie again. Because, I don't know, like what I prefer is when they say, okay, this was an unexpected success. How do we get further into these characters? How do we explore the character further? How do we give them a conflict from a particular aspect of their personality that's a weakness of theirs and challenge them to grow? And one of the best examples to this for me is Empire Strikes Back. Like, The Empire Strikes Back takes the same characters, but it really pushes them in the areas where they were flawed or weak in the first movie, but that the first movie didn't have time or didn't have the interest in pushing them, because it's more or less a fun adventure film.
The first one.
The second one is a drama, and it really pushes those characters, like Han Solo in particular. All the things that were weaknesses, but you kind of look past it because he has all the charm in the first movie, he's really pushed in the second in those areas. And Leia is used to bring some of that to the forefront, and his old friend Lando and stuff like that. And it's like that character is put into an uncomfortable position, and the character has to change in reaction to those things. This is taking a thing that people want familiarity with, right? Oh, I loved that thing, I want more of it, but it's expanding it in ways that are meaningful and that really push us into a new place for those characters. Instead of repeating the same exact beats that we saw in the first one. We don't want to see the same movie again. We want to expand on the thing that we liked. So, long story short, the newer Star Wars trilogy attempts to just repeat all the same beats of the original trilogy, and it doesn't work.
And the thing that it does very, it's good execution.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing it does well, but not, at least in my opinion, when it comes to the writing factor, right?
Yeah.
And I think, again, Empire Strikes Back was a shorter distance of time, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't a big one. I think a good example of sequels that repeat is like Blade Runner, like the first Blade Runner
2049.
and that one, but it was through a different character's eyes. But you got to make sure, and I think this is the big thing, because they wanted, more things. So there are characters that are going to be in there, but they don't play a major role as they do in the first one.
Yeah.
And so and I think the key factor too is when you have way a time, at least this is how I felt when it came to like Legend of Korra and Avatar. When I saw Toph and her state, I did not enjoy it because I went from Avatar, like her overcoming all this other stuff, and she regressed back.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? And I didn't get to see that, like that downfall. And the problem is when you have that, again, that divorce period, and you're supposed to accept this character. I've grown with this character being this, and seeing that character, that's not Toph to me. It's like, okay, I don't know who this character is. It's just an old woman that's cranky, but this is not the character that I left off on. And I think that's the same thing with Luke and everything else is just that.
And that's kind of how I feel about Advent Children, for instance, too. It's a regression of Cloud's character as an excuse to repeat a battle with Sephiroth, right? Anyways, I already answered this one from Ra Chan, talking a little about Last Story. How do I feel about it? I really liked it, but I felt it was a little bit forgettable. I like Lost Odyssey a little better. So sorry I couldn't get a little more into that one, because we kind of talked about Operation Rainfall. The Xenoblade was more memorable than Last Story. But I do think we will cover the Last Story on the podcast at some point in the future. I'm going to skip this one. We're going to just do one last one. And it's going to come from our subscribe star, Lion MX. I know you've talked about wanting to cover Final Fantasy XIV in your analysis videos, but if I remember correctly, you said you don't have enough time to play it with the current influx of people and content creators getting into the game, with the next expansion coming out in November, ending the story arc that began 10 years ago in 1.0. Have you gained any more interest in covering it? I'm actually the opposite of most people. As soon as something starts to become, I'm an introverted recluse. It's, people are flocking to this. I'll wait for them to finish, and then I'll step in.
Fair enough.
That's just my personality type. I'm really enjoying covering the stuff we're covering right now. I'm not a big MMO player. I've tried to get into Final Fantasy XIV on 3 occasions, and I've always stopped playing after the starting area, because I just don't like the structure of MMOs. I find it very boring to play them. That being said, all the Final Fantasy XIV fans will be, but what? You just need to get past ARR and get into Heaven's Ward. I've heard it all a million times. I run a Final Fantasy channel. I know the rebuttals to these things. I'm going to play it because I'm going to have to do a video on it eventually. But no, the fact that it is now the most subscribed to MMO in the world, it passed World of Warcraft.
Oh, wow.
That does not make me more interested. It makes me less. Because, there's so many people online. I want to kind of do my own thing. Let me go do Xenogears for a while or whatever. And that's just kind of my personality.
And that's a good example, because I think those games, and obviously I might get hated for this comment, but is a lot more about basically getting lost in it, escapism. Because I think
MMOs tend to be like that.
Because it has a little bit amount of story, but its pacing is not focused on its story. Its pacing is focused on its gameplay.
Yes, which I don't enjoy.
Yeah, and when you are a storyteller, creator, and stuff of that nature, you tend to want to go back and focus on the story, because it's expectations, right?
Yeah.
Because I think people that have played MMOs, they understand that gameplay is their expectation. Where
Single player.
yeah, is that can I play by myself without any people? And do I have to talk to anybody? And what is that guy doing at that shop? I don't have no clue.
Why is his name like Scratch My Butt 76 in this like fantasy world?
Why did I just die?
That tells you how big of a cash cow these MMOs are, though. If you can get a big one, 10 years later, it's still the highest, or it becomes, and it eclipsed a game that came out. It eclipsed a game that came out 20 years ago, and it came out 10 years ago. And it's like they're making more money on this than any Final Fantasy 15 or anything else could have.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh yeah, the MMOs have been their biggest money.
Oh yeah.
Okay, we have time for one more.
Okay.
So I'll only be missing on one, but I can answer this on Patreon. I'll just go and respond to his question.
Okay.
This one's from Michael Melkonian. How important are physical media and or other gaming-related artifacts to you? Personally, I am almost as invested in box art, manuals, physical cartridges, and discs as I am in the games themselves. Memories of needing to blow into NES and SNES cartridges to get the games to work and other similar memories are cultural artifacts that are as important to me as the content of the games I love. This is one of the reasons I fell out of PC gaming when Steam took over and made everything digital. Is this something that you relate to, or are you more just interested in the content of the games themselves?
Oh man, that's a good question.
I will give you a very short answer to this, and I'll pass it. I used to be. I used to be very into the collecting side of things. I used to be very interested in preserving, the artifacts. Making sure that the manuals were in perfect condition. And I fell out of that because I've spent so much of my time helping people move in my life and seeing all the stuff that people have and collect, that as I've gotten older, I've wanted to more and more like move towards minimalism in terms of the stuff I have. I don't feel happy with a lot of possessions and clutter and things in my life. And this is just personally, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, overall, but I tend to get more stress with the more stuff that's in my life. And I want to just get rid of it. And so I have learned to, despite the fact that there's ownership problems with digital, I get it, I do. This is why emulation exists.
The games are never gone forever.
Someone's going to have that thing for me.
Yeah.
If a company screws me over at some point, I bought this game from you in 2011.
Then you feel perfectly justified.
And you've stolen this from me. You've taken the thing I bought and you've said, no, you don't own it anymore. Well, I'll just emulate your game.
Easy enough.
The end. If I ever wanted
You're
to
perfectly
revisit.
justified in doing so.
I would feel perfectly justified.
Yeah.
By the law, I wouldn't be, but I would
Not
feel
by the
justified.
law, not legally.
So that being said, just because I have this tendency to feel bogged down by having a lot of personal possessions and hating the fact that I'm going to have to move probably at some point, I'm going to move all this stuff, and how am I going to package that so it doesn't dent it or tear it or ruin it? I just like to be minimal and get rid of things, and I'm actually considering right now selling my game collection and digitizing as much of it as I can so that I don't have all this physical stuff I have to lug around from place to place. I know that Bryce will not feel the same.
No, I won't. I will not feel the same. But anyway, so big tabletop player, big feeling, big like moment where you open up the thing and you smell it, and like sensory I think is kind of getting lost, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so like I own miniatures, collections, all the other stuff, and in this digital world it is harder and harder to get that into the gaming world. I think that's why I've kind of gone to the tabletop world, because it has so much of that still.
Yeah.
And it still has those physical properties. Now, obviously, it doesn't have, depending on the person, the stories that, you get as you would in video games in different levels. But the biggest thing is that I think what I've done myself is I've digitized everything, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so I digitized, but I still have my collection on display.
Yeah.
Because when I open up my closet, there's all my collection, and it just makes me feel good because on certain aspects I can see my collection physically.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, and it's also
I do think that there's value in that if I knew this is the last house I will ever buy.
Yeah.
I'm staying here the rest of
And
my life.
it's a decent sized house
it's a decent
to
sized house.
devote a whole room
And
to.
when I have people
collections.
over and I want to express my personality, I agree. I would love to have those things to display. So I think there's value in that. Yeah.
because I have the 1-Up arcade Ninja Turtle.
Oh yeah,
machine in
that's
my-
awesome.
yeah,
That's
and-
totally awesome.
And so I'm big about when you walk into your house, it should be also an extension of you.
Yeah.
And comfort does not, in my opinion, come from black and white.
Yeah.
Like when you come into your house and it's just like, oh look, I have gradients in my house. Isn't it beautiful?
Yeah.
That's
Texture.
what. Yeah. So hoarder here, but that's where I can't find the minimalist way to work well, because I would like to feel good in the place that I'm going, and whether it's recognizing characters or past times, the thing that you have to be careful of, and this is where you have to be careful of, does it work? Because if it doesn't work, throw it out. Or if it's broken, get a new case. Or certain things of that nature. And what is really important, because you can't keep everything.
Yes.
Because when it gets to the point where you are trying to walk across the room and you can't stand in appropriate places, right?
Yeah.
Then you have to do one or two things. One, everybody says downsize. I disagree with that. I say categorize. Like, try to find things that you can place this in, because space, geometry, which is awesome, has the property of, stacking on things, and
You can find a way to sort it to be neat.
Yeah, and so display cases, stuff of that nature,
Shelves.
Yeah, shelves, anything to order yourself. If you're a hoarder, that's your job, because if you're not, then it's toss it away. And I love going over to my case of miniatures and then picking up and feeling them, because there's like physical, I don't know, and I guess this is a really logical reasoning, but I feel things have that kind of personality to it, and it reminds me of the character, right?
Sure.
Like, I have a nice statue of the League of Legends characters, and when I walk in, you pick them up and it feels like them. And I think that helps you to remind you of positive things.
Sure.
Now, if you have a character that you hate
Displayed somewhere.
and things you dislike, that is when you get rid of it.
Sure.
So, or things that are not meh. I think that's the thing you should be inquired about.
Does it? What is it? What's her name?
Oh, yes. KonMari.
Yeah.
KonMari.
Does this give me
Does
joy?
this bring you joy?
Well, not so much that.
Get rid of it, please.
No, I don't believe
If
in
not, express appreciation to the thing, and then get rid of it.
No.
Anyway, what were you going to say, Kaysen?
Oh, I didn't have much to say other than I will just quote Indiana Jones here.
Okay.
It belongs in a museum. Done. Now, I would collect if I could. I'm married. Collecting's not an option for me.
Yeah.
I've got a wife and 3 kids, and our house is not my house. It is
Yeah.
a shared space.
Sure.
And if I, like you were saying, if I had a big enough house that was a final resting place
Yeah.
for my life, I could negotiate a room
Sure.
that this is my room.
Yeah.
And I would love to collect stuff, generally speaking, but I'm not sad about the fact that I have like very little
Yeah.
by collection wise. I have a lot of books and stuff. I have all the Nintendo powers from like 1996 and stuff. But if I want to see the physical things, I'll just go to a museum. Although there are no real good gaming museums.
We should start
That's
a
a
gaming
problem.
museum.
There should be a gaming museum, because this stuff belongs in a museum. And there should, but what museum would take my 1988 Mario Brothers 2 cartridge?
Yeah, seriously.
None.
I feel like, well, we need to wrap up, but I've had thoughts of like, it would be really cool to have a basement where you could set up to
It
where
would.
it is like a generational, almost museum-like
Oh yeah,
progression
we're through the years,
through
Yeah,
time,
that'd be
like
fun. That'd be
for,
cool.
video games, or whether it's Final Fantasy or something, where it's like, but I am a recluse. That would the only reason
Then
that
you'd
would
have
exist.
to invite people over.
The only reason that would exist is to show it off, and I don't want people to come over.
And you're like,
so,
please stay away from my house.
so why am I doing that? Why am I doing that? Right?
That's so
And
funny.
So that's why I've kind
Yeah.
of turned more toward minimalism recently. Is like, this doesn't make me happy to have. The only reason I have it is if someone come over, they'd probably think it's cool. It'd be a way for me to express my personality to them. But I'm not bringing anybody over anyways.
But your personality is don't come
Yes.
over. Stay away from me. I love that.
So what am I doing?
So,
What am I doing with my life?
That's pretty
Anyways,
funny.
we got to get Kason to the train station. Thank you guys. We love and appreciate all of you. You guys make this possible. The influx of support on Patreon, especially in the last few months, has been really amazing and humbling. Honestly, really humbling that people value what we're doing to the level that they do. It's really great. So we appreciate you. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Have a good day.